Welcome. This is another in our series of lectures that go along with the book Practical Research, Design and Process by Jeanne Ormrod. The slides come from the authors. The breaking of it into topics come from this professor, Professor Susan Hares. What I'm going to do is I'm recording these so that you can listen to the videos, maybe hear some practical uh, information and then use it to read the text and understand. What we're trying to do in this class is to grab hold of the information and use it to perform the basics of research, which is to establish a research proposal, which you will then use in research. So let's go through this section. Chapter 9 is about mixed mode designs, and it is actually more common in our research these days for mixed mode designs. First, I will go through 5 mixed mode designs, and then I will go through planning a mixed mode study. Let's go through the learning objectives that the author has so you can understand what she's trying to tell you. She's trying to first have you identify situations in which method designs are especially useful. I used a mixed mode method in my PhD design. I found it very helpful to triangulate data. There are 5 different designs: convergent, exploratory sequential, explanatory sequential, longitudinal mixed mode designs, and multi-phase iterative designs. I will go through all of these in this lecture based on her notes and experiences that I've had. Then she's describing effective strategies for planning and conducting the mixed mode research, including strategies identifying research and questions and hypotheses that lead you to mixed mode research studies, conducting a literature review for mixed mode studies, which will have to include information on methodology, choosing one or more samples, ensuring that as you choose the examples and as you plan the research, you ensure in the design the study's overall credibility. And finally, she's going to go how you go through analyzing and interpreting the data based on the method. She will also explain how some mixed mode research packets may require 2 or more separate proposal submissions and approvals for the institutional review board. And this iterative processes because the mixed mode design has some of the qualitative emergent, but it also has some of the gathering that quantitative does on individual participants. And so it's important that there is a clear definition that the participants can understand so they have informed consent and they have a right to their privacy. In addition, you must in mixed mode make sure that when you save data that might be private in any way, you deal with both the transfer of the data and the storage of the data that includes a right to privacy. This is the ethical forms. Now, let's talk first about the convergent designs. Convergent designs give equal or similar importance to the 2 types of data. When you see quan, it means quantitative. When you see qual, it means qualitative. When it's capital or bold, that means it's the primary. And when you see the small letters in a non-bold, that is the secondary. So you have a quan plus a qual, where the quan is capital, then that means the first and the qualitative is second. If you have the qualitative and then in bold letters with a capital Q and the quan is in small letters, that means the qualitative takes choice and the quantitative is afterwards. For example, histometrics will use qualitative coding and then quantitative theme counts to generate uh, data that quantitative analysis tools can use. For example, what's the mean of an answer on a scale? When you create in the qualitative encoding a use of a survey scale for the encoding, you will find you can make that transfer. I will have quite a bit of information on this as it's part of the toolkit I want you to have. Now, when you see quan capital with qual parentheses, it means that the second form of data clarifies the nature of the variables. So quan with a parentheses, qual is going to give you qualitative defining the quantitative data, and qual in bold with quant in parentheses means the quantitative will clarify the nature of the variables within the primary data. And as I just described, a qualitative encoding that uses a survey questions to identify certain scales will use the qualitative coding, and then the quantitative that uses theme counts will help you create those scales and use it. Now, there are two examples of a quan plus qual convergent die. They're an example of a quan plus qual convergent design. Take a look at it. Exploratory sequential is something I've done where you use qualitative methods to get a general sense of the phenomenon and then examine systematic or quantitative methods. I took qualitative methods to see if collaboration gave us a reason to find out why leadership was effective. The other two options is cohesion and cooperation. I will give you more details on why I decided that cohesiveness is one of those things that really turns groups to effectiveness. We'll have a textbook example and of the exploratory. The explanatory is when the first is a collection of considerable number of data, a lot of survey information or a lot of experimental information, and the qualitative data follows up. One example is an experiment where afterwards the participants are interviewed to find out what they found was useful. So you have the quantitative data that you have all the averages, the values they thought, perhaps the predictions for a result, and the qualitative gives us more background. Next is the longitudinal mixed mode. Here's a case where you're finding a single group of participants for two or more occasions over a lengthy period. You incorporate both in the collection and you weight them different. For example, you can have quant and quality that over time turn into a different instance of the survey taking and a different instance of what's going on. On the other hand, you can have the other modes. You can have qualitative with quantitative explaining it, and it can go to quantitative and qualitative mixed side by side as equal rate. Again, this is a mixture. Mixed mode has a lot of options, but these options may fit your data. That's where we give you feedback. Now, that's really important because oftentimes the real life adventure that you're into in the church is more than qualitative, or if it's qualitative, there may be some quantitative understandings. Now, the multi-phase iterative is something I did in my dissertation. I had three or more phases, and it takes a lot of work. Most dissertations will not use a multi-phase iterative, or it will take you a long time. If see the example of the textbook, know that I did it, but I spent 6 years working on my dissertation, and that's not what you want to do. So planning a mixed mode study. Now I'm going to pause here and give you a time to break, think about it, and I'll come back and talk about the planning for it. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope the added comments will be helpful to you.